Hello and welcome to today's WorkSafe Month webinar, Ever Made a Mistake? I'm Stephanie Morawski from WorkSafe Tasmania and I will be your moderator. Before we start, please take a moment to read the following slide about information received today. I'll now go over housekeeping. Oops, sorry, slide is not there. So you should be seeing a screenshot of the attendee control panel in the right hand of your screen, and you're likely listening in using your computer system by default. If you would prefer to listen over the phone, just select telephone in the control panel and the dial-in information will be displayed. Webcams and audience microphones will not be used in today's webinar. Questions will be taken at the end of the presentation. Please, however, at any time use your control panel to type and submit your questions for answering. Finally, today's webinar is being recorded. I would now like to introduce your presenter, David Bentley, Leadership and Workplace Culture Specialist, Speaker and Author from Just Leadership. David's career in Australia and the USA has spanned military and civilian aviation, including holding senior leadership positions in airport operations and corporate leadership development for the world's 5th largest airline. David has also lectured Bachelor of Science programs at a leading university, consulted to some of Australia's best known organisations, and is the author of a popular book on leadership. David holds a master's degree in science and technology, focusing on human factors, and has a range of other qualifications in engineering, management safety and quality. Welcome, David.
Thank you. All right. There we go. Today's presentation is obviously called Ever Made a Mistake. It'll be a bit of an exploration of our understanding of how and why humans do things. Humans make mistakes. Sometimes they're small and silly. Sometimes they're big and disastrous. Is it possible to eliminate human error? Well, as much as we'd like to, and as much as we work towards it, the simple answer to this is no, it's not. It cannot be done for lots and lots of reasons to do with how the brain processes information, how we act on that information, how we absorb outside information into our consciousness and exhibit that in our behaviors. We simply can't. Making errors is about as normal as breathing oxygen. The thing is, it's how we deal with error that counts. This makes the biggest difference in whether an organization has a safety culture or a just culture or not. When an incident or accident occurs, and I'm sure you've all experienced this, the most common response is to add more rules, procedures, or restrictions. We tighten everything up, we add more rules, and we think if we just put enough layers in place, this won't happen, people won't make a mistake. So the slide's a little bit slow. There we go. Okay, the trouble is, sorry, we'll go back now. There's a bit of a delay on the screen. Okay, that's better. A 7-minute procedure you have to complete in 2 minutes doesn't help. This is a very common response. I see it very, very regularly where organizations will put layers and layers of procedures and all kinds of restrictions in place to try and stop people from making mistakes or having a negative outcome, but it has to be practical, it has to work. And so we get ourselves into a causality loop where we're creating more problems than we're solving. And case in point, to protect us from negative events, legislation, regulations, and other rules are created to drive compliance. Now, these can be very useful things if we have a low level of understanding or knowledge about what is required. However, these consequences sometimes create unintended outcomes. A classic example of that is the largest aircraft accident, or most serious aircraft accident in history, and that was in the 17th of March 1977 at Los Rodeos Airport in the Canary Islands. Due to a terrorist event on the Big Island, or the island where the major airport was, a lot of aircraft have been diverted to this smaller airport. There were dozens and dozens and dozens of aircraft sitting on the ground, all crowded in on a small airport, thousands of people, and they sat there for most of the day waiting to get out. Now, the weather in this particular spot is notoriously changeable, and it started to deteriorate, fog coming in and that sort of thing towards the end of the day. The challenge was that in the building pressure cooker that happened with people sitting in cockpits, one of the captains of one of the aircraft decided to take off without a clearance. Now, he couldn't see all the way down the runway because it was foggy, but he built up a picture in his mind that he thought was okay to go, and he went without a takeoff clearance. Now, interestingly enough, he was a very senior check and training captain, in fact, the company's chief pilot, and a very dominating personality. And so the other two crew members tried to object, but more or less went along with him. So we think, well, this is a simple case of someone doing something stupid, but there's a lot more to this than that. The aircraft were sitting on the runway for most of the day. They were crowded in. They were struggling to get refueling. There were other aircraft in the way. And the other problem was that there was some recent legislation put in place by the Dutch government that introduced criminal penalties for pilots who went over the crew duty hours, so the amount of hours they're allowed to work, by even a small amount. Now, previously, captains had some flexibility with this in order to make sensible decisions and get the aircraft back to where they were going. So you can imagine him sitting there after being there all day, 400 people on board the plane, time's running out. He's got this threat hanging over his head of serious consequences if he allows it to run over and then take off. And so the pressure just built to the point that he built a picture in his mind saying, oh no, we can do this. And they went. And unfortunately, this was the result. 583 people were killed. So clearly the intent of the legislation wasn't to create a problem, but in fact, the investigators looked at this and said this was actually one of the pressures on the pilot that caused him to build a false picture in his mind and make this decision. So intent versus outcome is very important. We have to try and, when we make rules, instead of being reactive, we have to try and understand how they're likely to play out. So let's get back to a little bit of human behavior. Work is a human endeavor and it's subject to variability, including error by workers. Well, we like variability in some degree. We call one of the major types of variability that we like is called innovation. In other words, we don't stick to normal ways of doing things. We think of better and different ways to do things. A lot of great human inventions were invented by mistake. We varied a process either intentionally or unintentionally and made a discovery, which was fabulous. We don't like it when it goes the other way though, because we can't control it or it makes us fearful. But it's natural variability in the workplace that we have to keep in mind. You can make all the rules you want. Humans are not robots. If you want machine reliability, get a machine. Okay, it's as simple as that. Hardline, complex or inflexible approaches intended to safeguard human activities, though well-intentioned, as we've just seen with the KLM situation, may have unintended consequences. Zero tolerance, interestingly, for unsafe acts can actually make the workplace less safe. Now, I know this might be a controversial thing to say, but bear with me for a second. If you introduce zero tolerance, or if you have a big sign saying how many days since your last incident, and particularly in that case, it gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and you have a series of near misses, or you have an accident of some kind that's not catastrophic, what's the temptation for people not to report it or to rationalize it away so that they can keep that zero at zero or keep the number of days where they are? I mean, who wants to be the person that reports an accident or causes an accident that resets that 300 days since we had an accident back to zero? The corporate pressure on that can be enormous. And so what we see, in fact, is people underreporting or not reporting or having people sitting in a hospital bed, but they've got their laptop out, so therefore it's not a lost time injury. These are real risks that we have to be aware of. We need to understand what's going on. Here's another example of unintended consequences. Was a Germanwings accident that happened a number of years ago where a pilot with a history of mental problems drove his aeroplane into the Swiss Alps or the French Alps. So unfortunately, that was the headline, was all about the pilot with mental problems. But this accident actually started about 13 years earlier after the September 11th terrorist attacks. And that was that airlines were ordered to fit armored cockpit doors to the cockpit and to introduce cipher locks so that the pilots, so people couldn't get into the cockpit, which is all a great seemingly idea, except that the evidence shows that on 9/11, none of the hijackers broke into the cockpit. They coerced their way into the cockpit. And once people realized what the possible outcome of this, it was unlikely to ever be allowed again, one way or the other. And in fact, the fourth flight proved that, where the passengers got up and took on the terrorists. So we were solving a problem that actually didn't exist. No one broke down the cockpit door. So why do we need to put an armored cockpit door on? 12 or 13 years later, we've got this situation where one pilot was able to lock out the other pilot. And the other pilot, even though he had the code, could not get back into the cockpit. So we introduced a hazard that didn't previously exist in the effort to eliminate a hazard that didn't exist, if that makes sense. So we have to be very, very careful how we go about things. Unintended consequences can be quite nasty. Context is everything. In the workplace in particular, but where there are harsh consequences for mistakes that lead to safety events, people will not self-report errors or near misses. If you make a mistake and you think you're going to get sacked or punished in some way, you may not report it. That mistake may then propagate and cause a serious outcome. And this has happened over and over again. We've got volumes of information about this. And while I'm on this, I'll just sort of qualify in advance that I'm going to be using quite a few aviation examples because that's my history, but also because aviation has a very, very long history of trying to understand human behavior. It goes back almost 55 years since we've been scientifically studying why things happen with people that cause accidents, far more so than any other industry. Other industries like medicine and oil and gas have picked up on this human factors concept and are now following it quite closely. But the central premise here is we need to understand why events happen. Why do they how do we get here? It is almost never as simple as it sounds. Most unsafe acts in the workplace are unintentional. Unintentional. Slips, lapses, or mistakes. People don't go to work deciding, today I'm going to have an accident. It just doesn't happen. Sorry. Even unintentional, intentional unsafe acts can be the result of conflicting goals or environmental pressures. We create a system where we say, here's your 19-step procedure, but I only give you 5 minutes to do it. If you put that pressure on people enough and then tell them that the customer expectations are it'll be delivered in 5 minutes or it'll be done, this will be done in this particular time, then what happens is you have immediately conflicting goals and the pressure is on to deliver if they can. And this is where we get workarounds. Errors also happen in a complex ecosystem that can be years in the making. We've just seen this with the Germanwings incident and even going back to the KLM one. Errors are always viewed with hindsight bias. We look back and say, oh my God, how could they possibly have done that? It's what the Americans call Monday morning quarterbacking. It's with a good safety investigator or a good investigator in general, goes back to the beginning as far as they possibly can and say, let's see how this developed, not how do these numbskulls make this mistake. It's very tempting though to do that. Eric Holnagel came up with a concept called ETO. And if we create these circumstances where we have all these environmental pressures on somebody, we create restrictions in time frame, we create restrictions in circumstances, say if you're working outside and the weather changes, but we don't adjust the delivery time, then something called ETO will get you. What he calls ETO is the efficiency versus thoroughness trade-off. Workplace incidents or accidents are rarely as simple as they seem. We've talked about this already. Workplace leadership culture, time pressure, and system hazards, including system design, can all lead to ETO. You can have a design in a system that was designed 10 years ago, and the set of circumstances that caused that system to fail, or the human system to fail, took that long for all those consequences to line up before the system fails. So you can have a latent hazard in your system for years. And if you don't go back and constantly look at this in a human context, you won't discover it. So ETO is a real risk in the workplace today. Person involved in an incident or accident is often a victim of the convergence of these range of circumstances. They're just the last person in the chain. I don't like using a chain analogy because it's not always linear. If you can imagine the person in the middle of a multiple star sort of arrangement around them with incidents or circumstances coming in from all different angles, the person in the middle is kind of at the center of what happens. And all this range of environmental circumstances happens around them. And that's when you have an incident or an accident. The person involved in the accident is a victim often of those range of circumstances. This is not saying everybody's a victim, but very often when we do investigations, we find out that the person was just at the end of the link. So how have we traditionally handled error in the world? And we still see this very commonly today. 3 questions are often asked when things go wrong. And that is, what happened? How did it happen? And who is to blame? Now, this is a very problematic issue. The blame response, the guilty person is isolated, interrogated, scrutinized, convicted, and disciplined or removed from the system. Now, that's not obviously always the case, but there is still more than enough of this around that causes real damage to our ability to understand why things happen. And we'll talk more about why that is later on. Their actions are often viewed in isolation, they're taken out of context, and systemic or environmental factors are ignored. The reason for that is systemic or environmental factors are often expensive. They involve lots and lots of bits of the company or many people. It is much, much easier to ignore all of those and just identify the individual actions of the person out of context. And if you've ever had your words taken out of context in a conversation, you'll know how difficult that is to fight. In reality, the way it often works with blame is, the organization is a hammer and the person is the nail. If you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And the flip side of that is if you're a nail, everything looks like a hammer. And you are not necessarily going to cooperate with what's going on, in the investigation in particular. And understandably so. The blame response says, this was aberrant behavior. There's nothing to learn here. The seduction of blame. Blame is incredibly seductive. If you look at, well, the newspapers in this country that use big, bold headlines, specifically the ones I tend to ignore, are often going for an emotional response, an emotional hook, and blame is simple. Right? Blame is simple and very emotive. One person must be at fault. Blame can be understood because it is simple. All right, this person's evil, or this person was stupid, or this person deliberately did something. Blame shows that we're serious about doing something. Look, we burned the witch at the stake. It's all good. The village can go back to peace now. Blame makes us feel better and safer. It's a kind of self-delusion. Blame can divert attention away from deeper issues. Yeah, if we have to take a good look at ourselves, that's a bit uncomfortable. So we're much better off just taking the simple approach and finding someone to blame. And this happens all the time. We see it every day. We see it in politics. We see it all over the place. Blame moves quickly off the front page. Once we've found someone to blame, everything's okay. We can go back to work now. The newspapers will find something else to talk about. The problem is you create a fear-based culture. And fear-based cultures don't challenge current incorrect assumptions or beliefs. Fear-based cultures are not proactive. By definition, they're reactive. They're not predictive. Fear-based cultures favor visible activity over effectiveness, the kind of, in a person analogy, the kind of thing where a boss walks into the office and likes to see everybody jump to attention or all of a sudden get busy. It's a really unfortunate type of self-delusion, and it's not effective in getting the work done. Fear-based cultures don't innovate. Why would they? Who's going to stick their head up and say, I think we should do it differently? Fear-based cultures are rigid and not resilient. And for all of you safety practitioners, resilience is what we really need to focus on. It's extremely important, but fear absolutely inhibits that. So blame, what's it good for? Well, not a lot. Blame shuts down communication and prevents trust from forming. People will not self-report or expose system weaknesses in a blame-based system. Blame creates an us and them mentality. You're doing this to me. You asked me to do it and now you're hitting me over the head with it. All that changes is the identity of the person at the next event. Even fear of blame, when you build a blame-based culture, can have consequences. In 2013, I think it was, Asiana 214 crashed at San Francisco Airport. Part of the investigation was fascinating because there was nothing wrong with the aircraft. The pilots did not understand the automation properly. And for those of you who fly regularly, you might be comforted to know that automation flies the aircraft for about 99% of the flight. From the time the pilots take off, when they're at a couple of thousand feet, they select the autopilot on, and they control the rest of the flight through the autopilot, and they only disconnect the autopilot on finals just before landing. And in fact, if the weather's bad, the aircraft will land itself. Pilots are not allowed to land the aircraft under certain conditions. If they have what they call a Category 3 aircraft, the aircraft auto lands, and has been doing that so for about 3 or 4 decades. So these guys didn't understand the automation, but the problem was that in the organization itself, you had a fear-based culture. Because the autopilot can fly the aircraft much more smoothly and much more efficiently than a human pilot can, because computers are good at that, pilots were worried about actually flying the aircraft, so their hand skills decayed. And in fact, the investigation pointed out that pilots avoided flying manually because of a concern they might do something wrong, and the company would blame them if they performed a go-around or a hard landing that was captured by onboard data recording devices. So they were worried they were going to get reviewed and say, why did you do this? And you burnt too much fuel doing that, and this wasn't smooth and that wasn't smooth. Instead of a learning culture, they had a fear-based culture. And so when it came time where they didn't understand the automation and things started to go wrong, and the aircraft started to go outside of its normal safe operating envelope, they wanted to leave the automation to do it, and they didn't take over the aircraft manually until it was too late and the aircraft crashed. So a fear-based culture can be extraordinarily detrimental to how the outcome of activity happens. A blame-based culture, and there's some interesting stats from the Harvard Business Review and the Queen's School of Business and Gallup. A blame culture results in low trust and disengagement, which result in, here we go, 18% lower productivity, 16% lower profitability, 37% lower job growth, 65% lower share price over time, 37% higher absenteeism. You get a miserable workplace, you find people are using their sick time to the maximum. Everyone knows about taking sickies when they hate their job. And worse, 60% more errors and defects. This is not a resilient culture. And now 49% more accidents. It's extraordinary. I've lived through the transformation of the airline I work for in the US from basically the worst airline in the US to number one. And that was a cultural turnaround. We did it with all the same aircraft, all the same people, all the same equipment. The change was in leadership and the approach to our people. And our safety record went from being very ordinary to being the best, pretty much the best or amongst the best in the organisation, in the whole country, I mean. So where there is no trust or worker engagement, you have problems. In a study of Dutch railways, it was found that 80% of the workforce considered that the rules were mainly concerned with pinning blame. 95% thought the work could not be finished on time if all the rules were followed. So here you got your ETO again, and you've got your workarounds coming into play. None of the 50 respondents could remember having referred to the rules in a practical situation. The boss is telling me to get this done or else, and so I'll make it work the best way I can. And that introduces all kinds of risks into the situation. The thing is too with this is that the management or leadership role is extremely important. Violations are highly susceptible to management influence. We've been talking about this already. As most underlying causes of violations are either created by management, accepted by management, or condoned as normal working practice by management neglect. Investigation after investigation of accidents and incidents shows that there was a strong influencing factor of management, either by avoiding or neglecting or tacitly knowing what's going on, but they were meeting their targets, so they let it go. It's a very problematic situation in any organisation. Organisations need to review whether they have a compliance focus or an outcome focus. Now, this is a big one. The first step in becoming safe is often being compliant. Okay, well, if your organisation's non-compliant and you've got all kinds of problems, then bringing yourself into compliance can give you a baseline, a minimum standard of what you need to do. But from there, you need to grow, because if you only maintain a compliance focus, then that becomes the target. You have a compliance focus, we must meet compliance by any means we can, and it's the same as the zero harm thing. You start running into all kinds of problems. A sole focus on compliance creates an inflexible, non-learning culture. It's simple, but it's not effective. How can we get leading indicators of risks? When we're dealing with humans, we need to predict where they might go. Knowing where they are right now or where they've been is okay, but we need to have a real focus on the future and decide, where could this possibly go wrong? How many ways could this go wrong? Where can we find that information? In order to build resilient systems, we need to understand all of the aspects of unsafe acts or incidents. We need to understand it from I hate to use the word holistic point of view, an all-encompassing point of view. And this requires a particular ingredient. Open, honest, timely information from frontline operators. The people who know the operation best are the people who do it every day. They have volumes of information they can give us, but this can only happen where there is trust. If they don't trust you, they're not going to tell you. It's as simple as that. But trust and blame are mutually exclusive. So how do we create trust? Well, we can try to create something called a just culture. What's a just culture? Well, a just culture is a culture where frontline operators and others are not punished for actions, omissions, or decisions taken by them, which are commensurate with their training and experience. But where gross negligence, willful violations and destructive acts are not tolerated. So this is not no blame it's become kind of almost a pejorative when the people talk about this. It's not no blame. Well, we don't do blame at all. What we do is we can assign accountability where someone's done something gross or intentionally negligent. But the rest of it, we look at them and say, with what they knew at the time and the information they had, and the training and experience they had, was this something that was done by negligence, or was this something that could be reasonably understood in context of what was happening at the time, which is why you need the whole picture. It doesn't help to blame people because they just shut down and don't give us information. This is actually an EU regulation now, just culture. Okay, it's embedded into law, and it's starting to embed in a lot of organisations and regulations across the EU and in other countries. Now, this goes back all the way to 1944, actually, where the International Civil Aviation Organization, Annex 13, Chapter 3, said the objective of an investigation, the sole objective, is the prevention of accidents and incidents. It's not the purpose of this activity to apportion blame or liability. The Australian Transport Safety Bureau, in fact, is prevented by an Act of Parliament from sharing information from an investigation with any kind of criminal investigation or civil investigation launched by law enforcement authorities. If they find it on their own, that's fine, but we are not going to give you that information because we know the minute we do, everybody shuts up. Nobody's going to give us honest information, and we can't use that to prevent future accidents. There's a long history of this, and it works extraordinarily well. Just culture goes beyond compliance to ensure engagement. A just culture builds an outcome focus. We're looking at the future. We're looking at all the information we have and saying, how do we make the future better? It's inclusive, and it can achieve or exceed compliance requirements. I've done this as a manager in a very intense operation in aviation, and we totally changed from a punitive culture in safety, observation, and reporting to a just culture. And the amount of information I got through my team and myself from the operators at the airport, moving aircraft back and forth in high-risk environments, the amount of information we got that enabled us to redesign procedures and to help them was extraordinary, and our safety violations dropped absolutely dramatically, 63 to 97% in some cases. So we de-risked ourselves by introducing a just culture. An outcome focus means workers are involved in the process and design and review. This is the worker as expert concept. Some people might shake their head at that, but I would suggest go and talk to them if you're designing a procedure and involve them in it. They will know stuff that you don't know. You don't have their frame of reference. They will know where the pitfalls are. They will know what's practical and what's not practical. You may be able to, through a series of questions, walk them around to your way of thinking and have them come up with a process that will work, but you need to involve them. Processes and practices are regularly reviewed. Just because you make a procedure doesn't mean it's always going to work. You need to go back to it time and time again and say, is it working? Talk to the frontline people and find out, is it working? Are they doing it as we imagine? Because there's a concept called work as imagined versus work as done. What we want to do is minimize the process drift between how we imagine the work to be carried out and how the work is done. And again, we need to understand the environmental factors and the cultural factors that cause that drift at the workplace where we get workarounds or where ETO becomes involved. Okay, so we can learn from mistakes, but what about violations? And how do I tell the difference? Well, fortunately, there are very smart people who have looked into this. And in the UK, the National Health System has done a lot of work on human factors in medical care, and they've come up with a checklist. And I encourage all of you to have a look at this because it's really quite clever and very effective. So there's a deliberate harm test right off the bat. How do I know this guy wasn't just doing something stupid because they thought it was fun? Well, you look at it, was there any intention to cause harm? And you know what, most of the time there isn't. It's so incredibly rare that someone does something intentional that it's almost, we need to consider it, but it's almost worth discarding at the outset if we can determine that there was no intention to cause harm. Are there any indications of substance abuse? Are there indications of physical ill health or mental ill health? Let's see if I get the page to change now. Here we go. Are there agreed protocols or accepted practice in place that apply to the action or omission? I won't go through all of these, but I really encourage you to have a look at this list because it's very well thought out and it's extremely useful. When you're doing an investigation, run through this and use it as kind of a checkpoint to see if you're on the right track. Where learning and prevention, not blame, is the focus, Workers will offer information crucial to preventing future errors. Again, I've experienced this. It builds slowly, but once you get the culture in place where people come and tell you, you will not believe some of the stuff they come up with that you're not even aware of, that you can put in place actions to prevent these negative situations from turning into negative outcomes. And that's what we're looking for. They do this because they trust their leaders. You're not going to shoot me if I come to you and say, hey, I just stuffed up, because I, as a leader, now have the opportunity to see an error and stop the error from having a negative outcome. Errors don't propagate the negative outcome straight away. Oftentimes, there's the error, and if we catch it early, we can stop it from colliding with a circumstance where it causes a negative outcome. The leaders act with courage and determination to protect the just culture principles. You will still have people that will want to go for someone's head. Absolutely. There are those characters in any organization. We have to protect our people from those folks and stop it and say, no, we're going to do this methodically. We're going to find out actually what happened, not what you think happened. Discipline is only used in extreme circumstances. That's where there is intentional harm or gross negligence, like the just culture regulation said. And even in those cases, I would still want to fully understand that before I implied any discipline on a person. Information self-reported by people working in a just culture informs a continuous improvement process. A free flow of information allows rapid process improvement. We can change things on the go. Leaders in a just culture actively seek out and receive feedback. An environment of trust preempts threats to the organisation. And with a just culture, two-way communication ensures that practices and processes are fit for purpose. People will come to you and say, this isn't working. Can you help us? Can we change this bit of it? Or here's what I think, or here's some information that will help. Compliance is achieved by cooperative effort, not by coercion, not by saying you must or else. You must or else is not very good for humans. Quick case study. Danish Air Traffic Control Authority carefully introduced a just culture-based reporting system. Reporting of safety incidents went from 50. Now, this took some time to get people to trust them. You sure you're not going to punish me? No. You test us out and see. Reporting of safety incidents went from 15 to 940 in 1 year. Now, did we all of a sudden have 940 incidents? Or were they there all along? We just weren't reporting. Is this the case of if you don't test for COVID, nobody has it? It's one of those intellectual curiosities. They got 940 reports out from 15. So that's 940 opportunities for us to do something about it to prevent an accident. Serious incident reports went from 15 to 50. They were always there. We were just fearful of reporting them. And now when I know, I can do something about it. And unfortunately, this is the Trump effect. If you don't report near misses, they aren't happening. It's a really dangerous mentality. Keep your head in the sand. I didn't know anything about that. How did this possibly happen? There must be someone to blame. This is an aberration. No, it's happening in your organization right now. You're getting near misses, you just don't know about them. And finally, in just culture, there's a bit of an event line here. We have just culture below the line, which is event related. Okay, below the line means when something happens, we use a just culture approach to do our investigation. We go from investigative to informative, we're learning. We go restorative. Remember that the person involved in an accident is often the next victim. They suffer very badly for something that they may not have had any direct control over or was completely understandable. It's also inclusive because we say we're using you as part of the learning process. We want your experience to inform us and to teach us. We don't want to hang you out to dry. Above the line means we do predictive work, protective work. By building an open, communicative, predictive, preventative, and resilient culture, we find out about stuff before it turns nasty. We learn from our experiences. We encourage people to talk to us. We build a buffer of information. An error may still occur, but it's far more likely to be trapped before it causes harm. So if you're going to fail, fail safely. To build a just culture, trust is slow and fragile, so courage, persistence are essential. Leadership behavior is absolutely critical. It takes a long time to build trust and a very short time to destroy it. Positive results will follow, I guarantee it, if you do it right. A just culture is a trust culture. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, David. So there's now time for anyone in the audience who would like to ask David a question. So please use your questions pane on your control panel to type and submit your questions. Today's webinar has also been recorded and will be made available on WorkSafe Tasmania's YouTube channel.
All right, I'm not seeing a question. Hang on one second, I'll open my chat.
Oh, it's fine, David. The questions will come through to
Oh,
me,
brilliant.
and then I'll read them out.
Just checking, make sure I wasn't ignoring somebody.
A couple of comments have come in, David. Great presentation. Also very interesting, thank you. I will look at the NHS guide for my workplace.
Awesome, that's good. It's a really good guide. I was very impressed when I saw it.
And another couple of comments, again, great presentation, a few light bulb moments. Also can relate to the topic, but where is the best link for further information?
If you, to be honest, there is so much information about this. If you just go onto Google and you type in just culture research, you can go all the way from academic papers to lots and lots of really interesting studies that have been done in medical organisations. There's no one great link that I would go to, although Sydney Decker does have a book called Just Culture, which is quite interesting. So you might check out Sydney Decker. He's at Griffith University. On YouTube, he has a short course in Just Culture, which is he's a pretty entertaining guy. So that'd be worth a good place to start. But seriously, if you Google it, you'll find there's so much information that it really can inform you.
Thanks, David. Again, any recommended resources on Just Culture?
There's, the longest history of this has actually been in aviation. So again, if you go to, for example, the FAA, the Federal Aviation Administration in the US, you type in FAA Just Culture, there is a whole series of articles and information about it. CASA also, in their human factors library, if you go onto the casa.gov.au, the Civil Aviation Safety Authority, they have whole courses that people have to take in human factors, and part of that is talking about just culture and the benefits of it. It's actually required education for all aviators and all engineers. So that's a great website. They've got slides, they've got CDs you can order or DVDs, all kinds of stuff. So I'd encourage that as well.
Thanks, David. A question, how do the workers challenge the managers to take on this culture?
Look, that's really interesting. One of the ways is with any workplace culture, you've got people who are more assertive than others, but I would encourage going to, if you have got specific information that's useful, find a leader in your workplace who's more approachable than perhaps others and go to them and say, look, here's what we've seen. We've all had a talk about it. We've got some recommendations on how we can change this procedure, or here's an issue that that comes up time and time again that we see that nothing seems to have been done about. Can you please look at this? And then the key there is follow up. Go back and ask them a week later, how are you going with that? It's a really interesting situation. As long as you follow up with people, because they're busy, they'll usually take the time to listen to what you say and absorb that. But definitely come up with material things that can be changed for the better. And once people see the benefit, they go, oh yeah, we did that and it worked, they're much more likely to be open to you.
Thanks, David. A few more comments have come in. What a game changer for innovation if we can change from blame to a just culture.
Absolutely, yeah. Look, it has been one of the key things that's helped aviation become the safest form of transportation ever invented. In fact, I'll give you a quick example. In 2015 and 2017, each year there were 3.8 billion people that flew on the world's airlines. And in each of those 2 years, there were no accidents, no major accidents, no fatalities. So if you think of that, that's half the population of the Earth. And yet the same period, every year, 1.2 million people are killed on the world's roads. One of the major drivers behind us understanding what's happening with accidents or near misses is understanding the psychology of the people involved in them, because very often there's nothing wrong with the aircraft. These mistakes are made by people and we need to understand why. So if you need proof, that's a pretty good one.
Thank you, David. There's still time to submit questions via your questions pane on your control panel to today's presenter, David Bentley from Just Leadership. Question, David. As leadership is critical, what should be the qualities required for being a leader?
Oh, yes. I just did a workshop on this the other day. I must say also, I'm actively working as a leader in an organisation, senior leader in an organisation at the moment, and I have to practice what I preach. Look, one of the key things is being able to accept feedback. If you have what we call emotional intelligence or emotional maturity, you have to be able to accept feedback. Some leaders think that if they're accepting feedback, it's an indication to the workforce that they don't know everything, and therefore, as a leader, I have to know everything. Therefore, if someone gives me feedback, I must either pretend I already know it, or I have to ignore it and say, no, my information's better. As a leader, being open to feedback and simply receiving the feedback and saying, thank you, don't try and qualify your answer, to say to listen carefully, and that's another key skill, you must listen. And by the way, when you're listening, shut up. Don't try and interject. I'm not a fan of active listening for lots of reasons, but when someone's giving you information and they're saying, I want to tell you about this story, very often if you interrupt them, particularly if they're a subordinate of yours, they'll be off-put by your interruption, or you might interject your opinion based on your summation of what you think they're saying, instead of shutting up and letting them tell the whole story and listening carefully and finding out what they're really getting at. People will often preview part of what they want to say, and when you jump on it and solve the problem for them, you never get to the real problem, which is in the background. The real problem, this was just, the first part was just an excuse to talk to you. The real problem exists if you listen long enough and if you ask intelligent, open questions and keep them talking as long as possible. In fact, I tell this to folks in my sessions, if you can practice this on your friends and family, see how long you can keep them talking by listening and asking questions. That's absolute, it's the single most important skill a leader can have, is actually to shut up and listen.
Thanks, David. A question, how do you translate trust culture into something that can improve relations that could involve problems with superiors with personality issues, such as perceived psychopathy or a psychopath?
Yeah, look, you never see this in leadership, do you? You never have, leaders, business leaders or national leaders who are narcissistic psychopaths. You never see that at all, I'm sure. People are only interested in themselves and how they see the world and discount everybody else. Look, it's a real problem. In fact, I devote a whole section of my workshops on leading upwards. Very often you have to find out what those people want. Here's a general rule that I've had, and I talk about this in my book, Naked Leadership, is if you want something from somebody, make it about them. So if you want to go to your leaders upstairs, despite the fact they might be, a little bit strange or a little bit self-involved, find something that is important to them and arrange your argument or your suggestion or your question around something where you can remove some level of pain from something they're interested in. So if they're very self-centered and the organization looks bad because we're having safety issues or we're having people issues, then find a way to tell them that if you allow me to go down this road, I will reduce your pain level. You won't have to answer difficult questions from the board or from other people. I will make you look better, if you like, if you allow me to do this. You've got to play to the audience that you're talking to. And by the way, I must say, please, holistically, this is not just a safety thing. A just culture should operate through your whole organization. So for example, in your normal performance interactions between leaders and employees, you really must, I've been applying this since the 1990s and with organizations I've worked with and consulted to. If you apply a just culture approach to all of your organization, not just safety, you won't believe the kind of performance improvements you get. It's quite extraordinary. So yeah, I would play to their area of discomfort and try relieving their pain a little bit. You do that and all of a sudden they go, oh, that felt good. I'll have more of that, please. And they won't even realize what's going on.
Thanks, David. Another question, LTI or LTIFR is a terrible KPI, particularly in a just culture. What are the safety KPIs that you see value in?
Okay, look, nobody wants someone to get injured, so you don't want lost time injuries, and that's fine. But if you start to build a just culture, what you'll actually start to develop is, because lost time injuries that data is lagging data. all right? It's talking about stuff that's already happened. If you pay attention and you keep records and you have regular communication with your people, start when you ask the questions, when they get used to and they start to trust you, they'll start coming up with information. So I would lean forward and go, what are the predictive things that we've discovered? What are the hazards that we've discovered or the procedural problems that we've discovered through our communication that have allowed us to prevent a possibly negative outcome? When you get that, people will go towards whatever feels good. And if you start to publicize the fact that we're making progress here by being predictive, instead of by trying to reduce the incidence of things that have already happened, you do get predictive information. And by the way, keep notes of it. We often forget good stuff. Bad stuff evolutionarily is important to us, right? If you're, we have an evolutionary tendency to focus on negative information, and that's for survival reasons. You know, the old story, the rustle in the bushes could be a predator about to eat you, or it could just be the wind. Well, most of the time it's not going to be a predator. But if you always assume that, you're going to get eaten by a predator one day, and then you won't get to pass your genes on, and so therefore the people who are fearful are the ones that survive. Well, that's the same with organizations. If you're only focused on fear, that may be protective initially, but it won't ever let you to leap over that boundary and go to a place that's more informed and better. So I would look for leading indicators always, and you can only do that if people trust you, and you can only do that if you regularly ask them to provide you information.
Thanks, David. Do you agree with the statement that people are rarely to blame, but systems processes organisations?
Look, largely yes. You have to be careful with this because people see that again, they go to the no blame thing. Oh, it's the system's fault. It's everybody else's fault except mine. No, there's a difference between blame and accountability. When you do an investigation of somebody's actions, you are holding them accountable. But unfortunately, we've conflated the two concepts of blame and accountability. Now, in public discourse, when we talk about accountability, we're really talking about blame. But that's not what it means. Accountability simply is having your actions measured. It doesn't say what the outcome is. So the fear of an investigation tells you a lot about your culture. The fear of how people, whether they're open or not during an investigation or during an inquiry, tells you about the culture of your organization. If you have trust, they'll be much more open. So we don't want to talk about no blame, because then the detractors will say, oh, that's all like no blame stuff. But I can tell you from 4 or 5 decades of aircraft investigations, and by the way, air crash investigations is a fun series to watch. They don't get everything right, but oftentimes the human part of it is investigated quite well. The organisation always has something to learn. I've never seen an incident yet where something to do with the procedures, the practices, the environment, the equipment, the leadership, the communication, the review wasn't lacking. And you say, if you take that out of the system, would that accident or incident have occurred? And the answer usually is no, it would have been trapped earlier on. So yeah, there's very, very rarely a case, except where someone's done something intentionally, where one person was the sole contributor to the accident. And even if they were, you say, well, why didn't we have defenses in place to prevent that? You see how that works?
Thanks, David. A comment that has come through, it's great to hear about a just culture approach. I can finally give a name to my approach to safety and incident investigation.
Great to hear. Great to hear. Look, you have to have a learning culture. If you as an investigator, or even, and by the way, I say this as a leader, in all performance situations, I just had one the other day, where somebody comes in thinking they're about to be grilled for some mistake they've made, and you sit down with them and go, they're expecting that you did this and you did that, and you actually say, all right, well, look, let's sit down, start from the beginning and tell me everything you remember, and then you shut up. That's the beginning of a just culture. Listening is the linchpin of a just culture. And the longer somebody talks, the less able they are to, I won't say lie, although I just did, give you false information. People are not very good at keeping up false information over a long period of time, a long conversation. So I'm really glad to hear that. If you just start off with the premise that it's very unlikely this person did it deliberately, I'm here to find out the whole story, then you're well on your way to a just culture.
Thanks, David. What's your opinion of removing safety from KPI or incentives?
Oh, this is a difficult one. This is, again, the easily measurable part. If you produce safety should be just part of our culture. This is how we do things. An open and just culture means that it's just part of our behavior. It's like saying, please don't murder anybody. And we measure our success as a society by how few people we murdered. Well, it's kind of a simplistic approach. Safety from KPIs is a bit of a worry. Safety should be how we're doing it. If it's a KPI, that tells me that there's something wrong with the way we're doing it, because it should be just the way we do it. And when events happen, then we investigate, we learn, and we move on. The KPI should be, what are we learning? What did we learn today? What did we learn this month? Come back and look at our situation and any incidents we had on what happened. What did we learn? Not how many people did we sack, or how many people were blamed for things. So KPIs and safety can be very problematic, because we get back to that whole towards zero thing, or the 47 days since our last accident. That's a KPI. KPI is to get it to zero. To get it to as maximum number as possible and to hold the injuries at zero. But who wants to be the person that breaks that KPI? And if I break that KPI and I get nailed for it, was I responsible? And almost always the answer is no. Well, then why are you pinging me for it? This is an organizational thing. See how that
Thanks,
goes.
Dave. Thanks, David. And then just to close, how do we best respond to public pressure to name names?
Oh, yeah, this is the circus. This is going back to the Roman circus, isn't it? Put someone out in the middle and let the lions eat them. Look, institutionally, and I'll go back to aviation again, because again, it's got the longest history on this. Information is not generally released to the public from an accident inquiry. Very little information is given until a report's completed. They don't give out the names of people involved. They certainly don't give it to the media. The media finds out on their own means. We need to talk about the fact that we are all responsible for this. So when people say, but who was responsible? You say, we found organizational problems that are, they come up in a number of areas, and we're working to address those all so that we prevent future incidents. But who was to blame? We're not talking about who is to blame, because no one person is to blame. Well, who's accountable? Well, we all are. We're looking at this in a systematic way to prevent it. And you really have to resist that temptation, because it is not helpful. They want a witch to burn, and that doesn't help anybody.
Thanks, David. What are your thoughts on corporate visions of zero harm?
Look, I was in the post office the other day, early in the morning, to pick up a parcel, and I saw a sign behind the counter that said, all accidents are preventable. Now, that's a nice thought. It is. But people will take that one step further and say, therefore, there should be no accidents. And the answer to that is, well, philosophically, you're right. But if we live in the world of humans, that's not realistic. And if you set unrealistic goals for people, then they'll fight to protect that zero. Again, we'll get this kind of reporting where people are sitting in a hospital bed with their laptop, and as long as they're answering emails, it's not a lost time injury, so everything's good. We don't learn from that. So as a philosophical intent, of course we don't want people to be harmed. Of course we don't. But you have to be really, really careful that that doesn't turn into a KPI which infects the organisation, as one of the previous questioners alluded to, and we then start defending the zero, because that doesn't work. People start covering stuff up. When you have a goal, Boeing got caught out with this with the 737 MAX. There's nothing fundamentally wrong with the aircraft, but they put a system in there, and they were so driven to go to production, because they were in hot competition with another manufacturer, that they overrode their version of towards zero was towards delivery. And they overrode the objections of people who could reasonably see there were going to be problems. And they said, no, we've got it all sorted. We are going to go to production. And of course, the results plain for everyone to see, so to speak. So as a philosophical intent, okay, fine. If you have to say that to make people feel warm and fuzzy, okay. But it's how you execute it internally. That's where the rubber meets the road. Of course, we don't want people to be injured. Of course, we want zero injuries. But be careful of that turning into a kind of religion, where then people have to defend the dogma, despite the fact they know it's ludicrous.
Thank you, David. And we'll close just with a final comment that has come through from an audience member. I've heard David present previously, as well as Sydney Decker. Both brilliant, thank you.
Oh, that's brilliant. Thank you very much. I really appreciate it.
So thank you, David Bentley, Leadership and Workplace Culture Specialist, speaker and author from Just Leadership. And thank you everyone for attending today's webinar, Ever Made a Mistake? At the close of this webinar, you will receive a survey to complete. We do appreciate you providing us with your feedback. Today's webinar has also been recorded and will be made available on WorkSafe Tasmania's YouTube page. On behalf of WorkSafe Tasmania and the WorkCover Tasmania Board, thank you for joining us, and thank you, David.
Thank you.